May 8, 1945. Across Europe, church bells are silent. The world holds its breath. In Berlin, the sky glows red, not from fireworks of victory, but from the endless banners of the Reich. The black swastika flaps over Buckingham Palace. The Eiffel Tower gleams with the Nazi eagle. In Moscow's Red Square, German tanks parade where Lenin once spoke. Adolf Hitler stands on a marble balcony, watching as millions salute below. His voice echoes through every radio. The 1,000-year Reich has triumphed. America remains isolated. Weary from years of war, it never fully entered. The Atlantic is no longer a wall. It's a border patrolled by U-boats. In the Pacific, Japan reigns from Australia to Hawaii. Humanity's fate seems sealed beneath two flags, the rising sun and the Iron Cross. In this world, there are no United Nations, no free press, no democracy, only obedience, a victory that rewrote humanity itself. But how close did this nightmare come to becoming real? To understand how dangerously close the Nazi regime came to shaping such a world, we must return to the late 1930s, when Hitler's vision of global domination began to solidify. Europe was fractured. The scars of the First World War still bled through its borders. Britain and France, exhausted from the previous generation's slaughter, hoped appeasement could contain Hitler's ambition. It didn't. In 1938, Germany absorbed Austria. Months later, the Sudetenland fell without a shot fired. By September 1939, the Wehrmacht crossed into Poland, and the world plunged once again into total war. But in those early years, Germany's success was almost absolute. Blitzkrieg, lightning war, tore through Europe with surgical precision. Poland collapsed in weeks. Denmark and Norway followed. France, the continent's strongest army, fell in just 6 weeks. Paris, humiliated, watched German officers stroll down the Champs-Élysées as if it were their own boulevard. By 1940, Hitler controlled the heart of Europe. His armies stretched from the Pyrenees to the Baltic. Only Britain stood alone, defiant, battered, but unbroken. Had the Luftwaffe crushed the Royal Air Force during the Battle of Britain, the swastika might have flown over London within months. Behind the scenes, Nazi leadership prepared for what they called Lebensraum, living space. This wasn't just about conquest. It was about re-engineering the human world. Millions in Eastern Europe were marked for removal or extermination. Slavic nations would become labor colonies. Western Europe would serve as the industrial core of the new empire. From Hitler's mountain retreat in Berchtesgaden, maps were drawn not just for war, but for a new civilization, one dominated by Aryan supremacy and perpetual war readiness. The question is, if just a few battles had ended differently, could this nightmare have become reality? History often turns on moments so small they vanish between the pages of time. Between 1940 and 1942, the world stood on a knife's edge. A few different choices, a delayed decision, a shift in weather, a single political hesitation could have changed everything. If the Luftwaffe had not shifted its focus from airfields to London during the Battle of Britain, the Royal Air Force might have been destroyed. An invasion of southern England, codenamed Operation Sea Lion, was ready on paper. A German victory there would have crippled British resistance and forced Winston Churchill to negotiate. Germany would have secured Western Europe completely. To the east, another fatal gamble loomed. Operation Barbarossa, launched in June 1941, was Hitler's greatest and most destructive mistake. But what if the invasion had begun 6 weeks earlier, before the brutal Russian winter arrived? Soviet forces, unprepared and disorganized, might not have stopped the Wehrmacht before Moscow. Had Moscow fallen, the Soviet Union could have fragmented, its leadership captured or executed, and across the Atlantic, isolationist voices in America nearly prevailed. The U.S. Congress debated neutrality long after Europe burned. Without the attack on Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt would have faced immense resistance to entering the war. A neutral America meant no Lend-Lease aid, no D-Day, and no Second Front. With Britain subdued, the Soviet Union dismantled, and America distant, the Nazi dream of continental domination would have been complete. In this alternate path, Berlin becomes the capital of a united Europe, the Reich's fortress continent. German engineers perfect the V-2 rockets that, in this timeline, arrive too late. Jet fighters rule the skies. U-boats prowl from the Atlantic to the Arctic. The swastika becomes the world's new currency of power. This was the edge of possibility, a future that almost came true. From here, we enter the realm of imagination grounded in fact, what life might have looked like under a victorious Reich. Imagine a world where the Nazi Reich truly triumphed, not for a few years, but for generations. Europe's cities still stand, but they no longer breathe freedom. London's skyline bears the black-red banners of the Reichskommissariat Britannien. Paris has become a German administrative jewel, ruled by compliant French officials. The languages of Europe survive, but only under watchful translation, their histories rewritten to glorify the conqueror. The Gestapo, once a feared secret police within Germany, expands into a global instrument of control. Every street, every office, every school is monitored. Neighbors whisper carefully. Children are taught to report their parents for disloyal thoughts. Libraries are purged. Art, philosophy, and science are filtered through ideology. In this new Europe, identity is dictated by racial classification. Birth certificates define destiny. Millions of Slavs, Poles, Ukrainians, and Jews have vanished into what official reports call restructuring zones. The industrial cities of the East, Krakow, Kiev, Minsk, serve as labor foundries for the empire's machinery. For those of acceptable blood, life seems orderly. Streets are clean, trains run on time, unemployment is non-existent. Yet beneath that facade lies suffocation. No elections, no dissent, no truth. The human spirit itself is rationed. Religion fades. Churches stand, but crosses have been replaced by eagles. The Reich controls faith, declaring loyalty to Führer and fatherland the only sacred creed. Even across the Atlantic, isolationist America feels the shadow. Trade agreements with the Reich dictate economic policy. Anti-Semitic propaganda circulates freely. Universities quietly remove undesirable professors to maintain diplomatic peace. A generation of children grows up never knowing freedom, only hierarchy, ritual, and obedience. Their textbooks describe democracy as chaos. Their songs glorify unity through conquest. This alternate world would not burn with chaos. It would freeze in silence. A civilization seemingly organized, but morally hollow. And it is in that silence, the absence of rebellion, the absence of humanity, that the true horror of victory would reveal itself. But power doesn't rest forever on fear alone. Somewhere within this machine, something begins to stir. The calculation of total control through science and weapons beyond imagination. Victory had given Hitler and his circle absolute control and absolute ambition. With Europe subdued, the Reich turned its eyes to the future, not just to rule the world, but to reshape it through science, engineering, and terror. The war had already birthed technologies years ahead of their time. In this alternate history, German research never halted beneath Allied bombs. The V-2 rocket, the world's first ballistic missile, becomes the foundation of a new era. By the early 1950s, the Reich pioneers intercontinental rockets capable of reaching New York or Tokyo. Berlin becomes the launch capital of the planet, its skyline crowned with concrete silos and symbols of technological supremacy. The Messerschmitt Me 262, the first operational jet fighter, dominates the skies. Without the Allied advance to capture and dismantle German factories, jet squadrons sweep from Norway to North Africa, policing a continent with mechanical precision. The Luftwaffe evolves into a global air command, armed with weapons that render traditional warfare obsolete. Nuclear ambition also thrives. In this world, the German atomic program, once fragmented, achieves success. By 1952, a test site in the Kazakh steppes detonates the Reich's first nuclear device. Propaganda declares it the son of the new order. The Nazi state, armed with nuclear weapons, ensures that resistance is not only futile, it is suicidal. Science itself becomes a tool of ideology. Genetics, once corrupted by Nazi pseudoscience, now fuels state-run laboratories working to engineer the perfect citizen. Advances in medicine, aviation, and computing are driven not by curiosity, but by command. The world's brightest minds, captured scientists from across Europe, work under duress, their discoveries feeding the Reich's expanding empire. Even space is claimed. The Nazi moon program, Weltraumprojekt Wotan, aims to project the Reich's flag beyond Earth. Rocket engineers like Werner von Braun, never defecting to America, instead design orbital stations for surveillance and domination. Humanity's first steps into space become steps in chains. Technology was supposed to liberate mankind. Under totalitarian victory, it becomes the instrument of perfect oppression. Efficient, logical, merciless, and yet, even the most advanced empire must face its own crossroads, the moment when ambition and reality collide. That moment came in the alternate course of 1941 to 1943, the years that, in truth, determined the world's fate. The year is 1941, the pivotal hinge of the 20th century. In our reality, it became the beginning of Nazi decline. But in this alternate path, it becomes the dawn of their ultimate rise. When the first snow fell outside Moscow, the real world watched the German advance finally stall. But here, the snows come late. The Wehrmacht's engines do not freeze. The roads remain solid. German tanks, Panzer IVs and Tigers, roll through the ruins of Smolensk and Vyazma without pause. In December, Moscow falls. Soviet defenses collapse under relentless artillery fire. The Kremlin is captured intact. Joseph Stalin, cornered and betrayed by his own officers, takes his own life in a bunker beneath the city. What remains of the Red Army splinters into chaos. The Soviet Union dissolves. Ukraine, Belarus, and the Caucasus become Reich's protectorate. German banners rise over the Volga. Hitler stands at the ruins of the Kremlin, declaring the end of Bolshevism and the eternal German destiny in the East. In the West, Britain's resolve weakens. The fall of Moscow sends shockwaves across the Atlantic. With no Eastern Front to occupy Germany's strength, the Luftwaffe returns to its unfinished mission, the invasion of Britain. In the spring of 1942, German paratroopers land along the southern coast. The Royal Navy, weakened and undersupplied, fails to repel the assault. Churchill, facing an impossible situation, flees to Canada. By summer, London surrenders. King George VI abdicates. The British government signs an armistice in occupied Paris. Across the Atlantic, President Roosevelt faces a divided nation. Without Pearl Harbor, America remains reluctant to commit to another European war. Congress votes for neutrality once again. The Reich now rules from the English Channel to the Ural Mountains. Africa is partitioned among Axis powers. Japan dominates Asia, forming a new world axis stretching across half the planet. And in Berlin, Hitler begins to speak of peace, not as reconciliation, but as consolidation. The world map has been redrawn, and freedom's borders have vanished. But the world's turning point is never static. The second phase of this alternate war brings not peace, but a new kind of nightmare. The moment the Reich begins to consolidate its rule across continents. By 1943, the Nazi victory is complete. Yet what follows is not calm, but the organized suffocation of the planet. The war, once fought with guns and tanks, becomes a war for the soul of civilization itself. In Berlin, the new capital of the world, Hitler inaugurates the Germanic Empire from the steps of his colossal vision. Welthauptstadt, Germania, a city of marble boulevards and domes larger than St. Peter's. Albert Speer's architectural fantasies have become reality. Beneath its grandeur, hundreds of thousands of forced laborers die constructing monuments to tyranny. Across the former Soviet Union, the SS establishes Reichskommissariats, vast colonial administrations governing millions. Entire populations are displaced, starved, or exterminated. The General Plan Ost, once theoretical, is executed in full. The East becomes an agricultural colony feeding the empire. Its people, its subhumans, reduced to statistics. Western Europe, meanwhile, is pacified through propaganda. Radio broadcasts praise European unity under German leadership. Fascist leaders in Italy, France, and the Low Countries compete for influence, reduced to obedient vassals. Berlin's diplomats begin speaking of a European economic sphere, the dark reflection of a united Europe, ruled not by democracy but by racial hierarchy. In America, public opinion fractures. Trade with the Reich restores prosperity, but at a price. Hollywood is censored to avoid anti-German sentiment. Universities remove Jewish scholars. American newspapers cautiously refer to Hitler as Chancellor of Greater Europe. Behind closed doors, Washington knows that military confrontation is now impossible. By 1945, the Nazi atomic bomb detonates in the Kazakh desert. Its thunder rolls across the steppes, proof that no rebellion can survive. The Reich now commands nuclear fire, the skies, and half the world's resources. And yet, even in victory, the empire begins to rot. Paranoia consumes its leaders. Rival factions within the SS and Wehrmacht maneuver for power. Hitler, aging and increasingly delusional, retreats deeper into isolation, surrounded by yes-men and myths of destiny. In this moment of supreme dominance, humanity's hope nearly dies. The last sparks of resistance, scattered soldiers, forgotten partisans, and scientists in exile cling to the belief that no empire, however vast, can last forever. But for now, the world is silent. The Iron Order reigns. The torch of freedom, barely visible, flickers in the shadows. A decade has passed. It is now 1955, 10 years after the fall of London, 14 since the conquest of Moscow. The Nazi Empire stands unrivaled. From Lisbon to Vladivostok, one flag dominates the horizon. Berlin is no longer a city. It is an idea. Welthauptstadt Germania has become the administrative center of the planet's most powerful state. Massive highways, Reichsautobahnen, stretch for thousands of kilometers, connecting conquered capitals to the German heartland. The Reichsführer SS, Heinrich Himmler, oversees an empire of surveillance. Millions of citizens are catalogued, fingerprinted, and genetically screened. The Gestapo's reach is total. Even thoughts are dangerous. Public executions have become televised events, framed as moral lessons for the next generation. In the East, vast territories have been transformed into industrial colonies. Ukrainian wheat fields feed the German cities. Siberia's oil and minerals fuel the Reich's endless expansion. Russian culture is wiped from textbooks, replaced by Aryan mythology. Entire populations are forced into settlements, their histories erased. In Western Europe, collaboration has turned into normalization. German becomes the second language of education. National currencies are replaced by the Reichsmark. A new generation of children, born after the war, no longer remembers what freedom was. They grow up believing Hitler brought order to chaos. The world's communications are controlled by the Ministry of Propaganda. Every newspaper, every film, every school book glorifies unity under the Reich. The word liberty survives only as a historical curiosity, whispered among the old and the forgotten. On the African continent, colonies are redrawn into German resource zones. Native populations are enslaved or sterilized. In Asia, Imperial Japan mirrors this brutality, ruling through terror. Its alliance with the Reich uneasy but unbroken. Together, they divide the world's oceans like rival gods. The Reich-Japan axis now spans the globe, a bipolar world defined not by ideology, but by absolute domination. There is no Cold War, only cold obedience. And yet, under this apparent stability, tension brews. The Axis powers, though allies in victory, are rivals in empire. Japan's dominance in the Pacific threatens German pride. Berlin's scientists race Tokyo's to claim the stars. The peace of terror begins to crack. Because beneath every dictatorship, there is always resistance, waiting, planning, remembering. By the early 1960s, the cracks within the Nazi world order begin to widen. What was once a unified empire now trembles under the weight of its own contradictions. In Eastern Europe, small underground movements resurface. Former Soviet officers, peasants, and teachers form secret networks, not to fight openly, but to preserve memory. They print forbidden books, hide banned art, and pass on stories of the old world to their children. It is rebellion not through weapons, but through remembrance. In America, too, dissent grows quietly. Journalists whisper of concentration camps that still operate in the East. Photos smuggled by neutral diplomats reach the public. revealing the scale of genocide that never truly ended. Students march in protest, their placards reading, "Freedom is not chaos." Washington, cautious and fearful of war, suppresses them. Inside the Reich, the promise of a pure civilization begins to rot. Bureaucracy devours ambition. Fear replaces faith. Hitler's death in 1962, sudden, surrounded by loyalists in his Bavarian retreat, leaves a vacuum no one can fill. Rival factions within the SS and Party turn on one another. Albert Speer's technocrats advocate modernization. Himmler's loyalists demand more purity, more terror. Outside Berlin, the empire feels the first tremors of collapse. In the colonies, German soldiers face uprisings they cannot fully control. In Africa, entire regions rise in revolt. In Asia, Japan breaks the uneasy alliance, launching a surprise invasion of German-held India. Two totalitarian superpowers, once united by ambition, now clash for supremacy. The world that Hitler built begins to consume itself. By 1970, the Reich's nuclear stockpile deters open war, but cannot silence dissent. The resistance grows, from within Germany's universities to the mountains of the Balkans. Radio transmissions, carried by secret channels, speak a single forbidden word: Freiheit. Freedom. In a world built on fear, the human desire for liberty becomes the final weapon. The empire that once promised 1,000 years begins to crumble after barely 30. Its monuments crack, its myths collapse, and its silence breaks. But the cost is unimaginable. Entire generations have lived and died without ever knowing democracy, or the concept of moral choice. And as this alternate world bleeds toward implosion, it leaves one haunting question lingering in the ashes. If freedom had died in 1945, would humanity have ever found its soul again? History never happened this way, but it could have. The alternate world of a Nazi victory is not fantasy. It is a mirror held up to the narrow corridor of chance that saved humanity. Every battle lost, every delay, every mistake the Third Reich made became a stepping stone toward the world we know today. The fall of Berlin in 1945 was not just the end of a war. It was the survival of an idea that freedom, however fragile, is worth the chaos it brings. That truth must remain louder than propaganda. That compassion must outlast fear. When we look at what might have been, a planet ruled by terror dressed as order, we begin to understand how easily civilization can be reshaped by obedience. The Nazi machine was not only military, it was psychological. It promised security in exchange for surrendering thought. Millions accepted, millions perished. In that sense, this what-if scenario is not only about 1945, it is about every moment in history when power tempts humanity to trade liberty for stability. When truth becomes inconvenient, when silence feels safer than defiance. The difference between our world and that imagined nightmare lies in resistance, in the courage of ordinary men and women who refused to bow. The pilots over London, the soldiers at Stalingrad, the partisans in Poland, the scientists who fled and built anew. Each act of defiance, small, human, imperfect, carved a path away from darkness. If Hitler had won, the world might have forgotten what freedom meant. But because he lost, the word freedom carries weight. It carries blood and sacrifice and warning. Today, the lessons of that war remain more than historical. They are moral anchors, reminders that tyranny never disappears. It only waits, and history, fragile as glass, depends on the vigilance of those who remember. So when we ask, what if Hitler had won? The answer is not just horror. It is gratitude. Gratitude that he didn't. And a warning that freedom, once surrendered, may never return.